The sun has set over your village. Another day of work in the fields is done. You hang up your apron, wipe the sweat from your brow, and go inside for supper. Your husband is already there, along with your children, all staring intently at the flickering hearth. One of them, your eldest daughter, is out of sorts. She has been coughing a lot lately, and now her belly is swollen and sore. Your mind races with worry. What is happening to her? She cursed? What can you do? Now, if you are living in Europe during the Middle Ages, when I say that your mind races with worry, I mean something quite specific. You think about the saints. You might pray to Saint Dymphna, patron saint of mental illness and difficult children. Or you might think of Saint Mary of Egypt, who had successfully healed a young girl suffering from an evil spirit. But since these miracles don't happen right away, you'll also need to consult a doctor. And here is where our story begins. If you are a peasant woman in the Middle Ages, you most likely live in the countryside, working long hours growing food or raising livestock. Most historians estimate that 80% of people during this period lived in rural areas. Since you are a peasant, your life is regulated by the seasons and the weather. You plant and harvest crops and take care of animals, but the rewards of your labor don't really belong to you. Instead, you hand over part of what you grow to the local lord in exchange for protection. Although you have little control over your working conditions or the length of your workday, you do have some small ways in which you can exercise independence. For instance, you can choose which tasks to assign to your children or how much of your own produce to consume and save. But these are minor comforts. Life for peasant women is hard. Not only do they perform all the tasks expected of men, such as plowing fields, tending vineyards, or fixing roofs, but they are also responsible for domestic duties and childcare. During the harvest season, when everybody is needed in the fields, your youngest children may be left alone without any supervision. We cannot know exactly what you eat, but we do know that the diet of peasant families was almost exclusively vegetarian. Meat was too expensive, and fish was impossible to obtain unless you lived near a river or the coast. This means that your meals were probably made up of vegetables, grains, and dairy products. And just as your days are regulated by the seasons, so too are your meals. In the summer months, you enjoy fresh vegetables and fruit. In the winter, however, eating becomes more difficult. Since most food preservation techniques of the time require containers made of glass or pottery, poor families often eat the same food for weeks on end until it runs out. They might start the year with dried fruits and nuts and only later switch to root vegetables, beans, and peas. And depending on where you live, bread may be the staple of your diet, but nowadays, it is becoming harder to find. The cold weather makes flour less elastic, making it tough to knead. If your family doesn't have enough money to buy outside food or enough stored grain to grind into flour, you may resort to grinding whatever seeds or grains you have on hand. Your daughter's favorite bread might become something coarse and bitter. It is hardly the best situation for a young girl recovering from an illness. What happened to her? Well, the answer could be anything, really. Medieval medical science was rudimentary at best, and sometimes plain wrong. It's just as your mind goes to saints first, so too does the medieval physicians. Saint Dymphna might have been a good choice. After all, she is credited with curing a young girl suffering from an evil spirit. But what if the problem isn't a demon? Doctors during the Middle Ages believed that illnesses were caused by an imbalance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black and yellow bile. To cure your daughter, a physician would attempt to rebalance these humors, most likely through leeching, the practice of attaching leeches to the body to suck out bad blood. Bloodletting was one of the most common treatments used by medieval doctors. Other popular therapies included pills made of dried animal parts, powdered bones, unicorn horn, or dried insects. In addition to treating physical ailments, physicians also used similar methods to cure mental problems. But unfortunately for your family, many medieval doctors weren't properly trained. They were barbers, for instance, or surgeons who had never attended medical school. And although some remarkable women, such as Trotta of Salerno, wrote influential medical texts, their work was mostly ignored or dismissed as mere female intuition. All this is to say that healing your daughter is far from certain. The medicines could make her condition worse. They could even kill her. And unfortunately, you wouldn't be the first to die this way. According to historian Jack Hart, during the Middle Ages, around half of all patients died as a result of medical treatment. For this reason, most families preferred to seek treatment from traveling healers, midwives, and wise women. These individuals weren't necessarily better at treating illnesses. but at least they knew that too much bloodletting or the wrong herbs could be dangerous. But even if your daughter recovers, her life won't be easy. Women in the Middle Ages were expected to marry young. Marriages were usually arranged between families and often took place when the bride was between 12 and 15 years old. Once married, your daughter will be primarily responsible for bearing children. And should she survive childbirth, she will have to repeat the process several times. Without access to birth control, a woman's childbearing years last from puberty to menopause, roughly between the ages of 12 and 45, meaning that she will probably give birth around 8 to 10 times during her life. Fortunately, she won't do this alone. Her mother and grandmother will be there to help. They've done it many times themselves. Life as a peasant woman is harsh, but it is possible. Medicine is risky and childhood is deadly. However, if your family is lucky, your daughter will grow up and marry well. She might become the wife of a baron or a duke. And if that happens, her life will change completely. You grew up in a large castle with high walls and sturdy towers. From your room, you can see manicured gardens and neatly organized farmlands. Your parents made sure that you had the best education money could buy, and now you read and write, something that most people of either gender couldn't do. Your teachers also made sure that you knew all the intricacies of courtly love and proper etiquette. Now you are ready for marriage. Groom will be a stranger, but you trust your father's judgment. He is the king, after all, and he needs a powerful family to secure his lineage. You will never have to work a day in your life, but you will be expected to bear heirs. And if you are lucky, you will have sons. If not, your daughters will be married off to other nobles, strengthening your husband's power base. The responsibility weighs heavily on your shoulders, but you are trained to deal with it. Your life might seem enviable, but it is lonely. You are forbidden from having close relationships with anyone outside the court. Nobles were not supposed to associate with peasants, and your husband, while fond of you, spends most of his time hunting or in council, who will help you deal with the isolation, and who will teach you the mysteries of running a household. You have a few options. There are women who do these things for you, servants hired with your own money. Servants are typically poor people who have no other way to support themselves. While you were educated, these people are not. They can't read or write, and they have little understanding of courtly manners. Nonetheless, you need them. Some will cook and clean for you. Others will manage your clothing and comb your hair. At least they can make your life easier. But the best help comes from other women. Women who were born for this kind of work. Ladies in waiting, gentlewomen, and governesses come from respectable families and have excellent manners. Their presence reassures you. You feel safe with them around. They are also hard workers. While they comb your hair, they gossip about the latest scandal in the court. While they dress you in fine clothes, they tell you the juiciest bits of news. And as they rock your cradle, they share stories of brave princesses and magical lands. With them, life at court is bearable, and if you are lucky, you might even find a friend. At court, time seems to slow down. There are elaborate ceremonies for everything. Even getting dressed takes several people and half an hour. You watch as your ladies in waiting put on your clothes, tie your shoes, and adjust your veil. Today is a special occasion. Your husband will be hosting visiting royalty, and you have been asked to receive them at the door. When they arrive, you will be in charge of greeting them, leading them to the throne room and engaging them in conversation until your husband is ready to meet them. Then you will follow your husband into the throne room and stand beside him while he greets his guests. Your job is simple. Just don't mess it up. And if you thought that was a lot of pressure, you haven't met Queen Isabella of France. She has to plan an entire royal wedding. She receives word that the bride-to-be has arrived at court. Her name is Lady Margaret of Burgundy, and she is the daughter of the Duke of Berry. The king has arranged the marriage with the Duke as a way to secure his southern border. But that doesn't matter to Isabella. She is the one who will have to ensure that the wedding goes smoothly. Margaret is only 14 years old and has never spent so much time away from home. Will need someone to look after her. Isabella knows just the person, her niece, the Marchioness of Brittany. The two women quickly get to work. Margaret must be presented at court and then introduced to her future subjects. She will need to memorize the correct titles and forms of address and learn the customs and traditions of the French court. The wedding will be in 2 weeks. Time is tight. While Isabella and her niece plan the wedding, the bride-to-be is being introduced to court life. She is escorted everywhere by her older cousin, who patiently answers all her questions. She meets the king and queen and curtsies before them. She attends a jousting tournament and watches as knights try to unhorse each other for her amusement. She rides in a golden chariot while attendants toss flowers into the crowd. Finally, the big day arrives. The church is decorated with flowers and precious metals. The bride wears the finest gown and jewels. And as she walks down the aisle, everybody stands and applauds. The ceremony is long and full of pomp and circumstance. But at least the bride didn't cry. It would have been bad luck, and nobody wants to tempt fate. After the wedding feast, Margaret retires to her chambers, exhausted. She hopes that tomorrow will be less hectic. Thank you for watching. Remember to subscribe to our channel to be notified of new releases. Also, a huge thanks to all our supporters who are listed on the screen right now. You helped us make this video possible. It's spring 1429, at a crossroads in the forest of Argonne, about 6 miles north of the town of Beaugency. Two armies face off. One, a ragtag collection of peasants, villagers, shepherds, and farm laborers. Numbers perhaps 1,500. The other is a battle-hardened force of elite. English soldiers numbering around 6,000. Both sides prepare for combat. While neither army has a formally appointed leader, one side has a military advantage, not because of numbers, but because of morale. On the side of the French, standing before her troops, is a young woman, barely 17 years old. Dressed in chainmail and wearing a steel helmet crested with a plume, her name is Joan of Arc. In the space of a few weeks, she has risen from obscurity to become a military leader of a nation. Born around January of 1412, Joan grew up in the village of Domremy in the Duchy of Bar, near the eastern edge of France. Her father, Jacques, was a small landowner with modest means. Her mother, Isabella, was a devout Catholic who drew upon local folklore and legend in telling her children stories of heroic women like the legendary warrior queen Brunhild. As a young girl, Joan heard the voices of saints urging her to action. She also developed an unshakable devotion to the Virgin Mary. In visions, Mary gave Joan direct orders. By the age of 13, Joan was acting on those orders, refusing to accept a suitor chosen by her family and instead vowing to devote herself to the church. At 16, she was sent to the town of Vaucoulas by her family to serve as a lady-in-waiting to the household of the local lord. She soon left, however, claiming she had been called by God to deliver France from the English. Taking only a few possessions, including a prized statue of Mary, Joan set out on her way. No one took her seriously until she reached the court of the Dauphin, Charles VII, deep in the south of France. Impressed by her unshakable certainty, Charles allowed her to raise a small force of men. This was no easy task. Men were reluctant to follow a female leader, let alone one without any military experience. And Joan was repeatedly turned away, often hungry and penniless, as she made her way northward. Eventually, though, men began to join her. Drawn by her charisma, her fierce piety, and her claim to have received direct orders from God, her band of followers grew, and Joan rode into battle with them at the siege. Of an early April of 1429, Joan had arrived just in time. The English had laid siege to the city, and its defenders were low on food. Given the dire situation, the city's mayor, Jean de Dunois, initially reacted with scorn when he learned of Joan's approach, believing her to be nothing more than a nuisance. He quickly changed his mind, though, when Joan burst through the English lines, dressed in white armor, mounted on a destrier, a powerful warhorse, and carrying a large banner depicting Mary. Joan charged into the heart of the English. The sight of the maiden warrior jolted the English forces. They hesitated, unsure what to do, and Joan led her small force all the way to the city gates. Safely inside, Joan removed her armor and stood before the mayor, explaining that she had come to lift the siege. At first, Dodona, still doubtful, offered her some food and wine, then dismissed her. But soon enough, Joan was back at the city walls, rallying the French troops. Day after day, Joan inspired the French to fight. On April, the French launched a massive attack. The English, caught off guard, retreated to their positions outside the city. Over the next few days, Joan continued to lead daring charges. By May, the English had fled. Orleans was saved, and Joan had become a heroine. Within a few weeks, Charles VII had arranged for her to receive the commission of a captain of infantry and a grant of land. But Joan's destiny lay not in administration, but in the battlefield. Now with thousands of troops at her command, Joan marched north to Reims, where the English coronation ground held. In July, her troops entered the city. Once again, she inspired them to fight fiercely, pushing the English back. Throughout the next month, Joan led her troops on a series of victories. Soon, the English were driven back to their strongholds. With the tide of war turning dramatically in favor of the French, Joan pressed on. Determined to crown Charles VII King of France in the very city the English had seized from French control. This was a bold move. Troyes was heavily defended. But once again, Joan led her troops in daring charges, inspiring them to take the city by storm. There on September 3rd, 1429, Charles VII was crowned king in the very heart of enemy territory. Joan had achieved the impossible, ending the English occupation of northern France. And then almost as suddenly as she had appeared, Joan's fortunes took a disastrous turn. Leading her men against the Burgundians, allied with the English, she was captured. Taken to the town of Rouen and sold to the English. The English government, eager to end the French threat and desperate to win back public support in France, put Joan on trial for heresy and witchcraft. With her every move controlled by her captors, Joan was unable to mount a defense. She was found guilty and sentenced to death. On May 30th, 1431, she was burned at the stake in the market square. She died professing her innocence and calling out to God and Mary for help. News of her death spread like wildfire across France. Grief-stricken men and women abandoned their work in the fields and hurried to see the body of their champion. Today, Joan of Arc is remembered as a martyr and a hero. She is the patron saint of France. Numerous statues, paintings, and poems have been dedicated to her. But in medieval France, Joan was controversial. Her story challenged traditional gender roles and expectations. Women were not supposed to be warriors. They were not supposed to defy the laws of God or man, yet Joan did exactly that. Her story disrupted the expected path for women in medieval society, which dictated that they marry, bear children, and run households. For Joan, the expected path was not good enough. She wanted something more, and so she forged her own. For women throughout history, the options for forging their own paths have been limited. Most often, they have depended on marriage for financial security, housing, or even basic safety. In medieval Europe, women could not own property in their own right, so any wealth they possessed belonged to their fathers or husbands. They could not sign contracts or appear in court without a male relative present. They could not vote or hold public office, and they could not choose their partners. Marriages were arranged by parents. In fact, a woman might be betrothed to a man she would never meet until she walked down the aisle. Such was the fate of Isabella of Bavaria, who married the future Charles VII when she was 13. Isabella spent much of her adulthood in the southern court of France, far from the political action. While her husband struggled to keep the English out of northern France, forced into a loveless marriage, Isabella threw herself into administering her lands, commissioning works of art and architecture, and planning elaborate festivals, all in the hopes of creating a cultural center in southern France. Although she had little power over politics, she played an important role in arranging her son's marriage to Isabella of Luxembourg. Thus, despite being sidelined, she used what influence she did have to shape events around her. Some women managed to find opportunities to wield power. Powerful families like the d'Artois used strategic marriages to increase their power. Eleanor of D'Artois, widow of the Duke of Berry, became a prominent patron of artists and scholars, earning the nickname Learned Madam. Others used their position as queens. Queen Isabella of France and England amassed great wealth during the reign of her husband, Edward III, and used it to build a magnificent palace at Windsor. Still others sought power by controlling their husbands. One of the most notorious examples was Isabella of France, wife of King Edward II, when her husband's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She took lovers, openly flaunting her extramarital affairs and seizing control of the royal household, effectively ruling England for several years. Yet none of these women lived a life like Joan of Arc's, a life defined by war, religious fervor, and the quest to reshape an entire kingdom. Theirs is a story of relentless struggle. They woke in darkness, ate coarse bread, worked themselves to exhaustion, risked everything in childbirth, feared sickness and privation. They toiled in the fields alongside men, yet were denied men's privileges. They carried the burdens of men and the burdens of women. For peasant women in particular, life was a constant test of endurance. Not only were they responsible for the endless cycle of domestic chores, they also labored in the fields. Their work was vital to feeding their families and paying their debts to the Lord. And yet they were paid less than men for doing the same work. Often they worked alongside their husbands, their sons, and their daughters, and they were responsible for feeding everyone's mouths. All the while, they had to attend to the needs of the household, collecting water, gathering fuel, preparing meals, caring for children, milking goats, and mending clothes. At the same time, they had to grow crops, plant orchards, weed the garden, gather herbs and firewood, and raise livestock. As you consider that routine, you may start to understand how likely it was that women died before their time. Life was hard, but for many women, it was also beautiful. Life on a small farm in medieval France meant that women spent their days immersed in the sights, sounds, and smells of the natural world. They watched the seasons change, feeling the heat of summer on their skin, the chill of winter seeping into their bones. They felt the wind in the trees, the rain on their faces, the sun on their backs. They saw the lush abundance of spring, the golden glow of wheat in summer, the riot of color in autumn. They smelled fresh-baked bread, blooming lilacs, wood smoke curling into the sky. They heard the laughter of children, the murmur of bees, the rustle of rabbits in the underbrush. They listened to birdsong, the wind whispering through the trees, the distant clank of a blacksmith's hammer, the gentle moo of cows and the bleating of sheep. The rhythms of nature surrounded them. So too did the rhythms of their communities. They celebrated feast days and saints' festivals with music, dancing, and feasting. They welcomed visitors to their homes and traveled to neighboring villages. They greeted friends and neighbors as they passed by, exchanging news and gossip. They watched children play in the streets, herded animals into the fields, and tended crops under a sky dotted with stars. They fished in clear streams, gathered berries along riverbanks, and plucked ripe fruit from trees. They sat on doorsteps whittling sticks, braided straw hats, mended fishing nets, and spun wool. They watched clouds drift by, the changing colors of sunset, and the moon climb into the velvet sky. They heard the church bells ring in the morning, at noon, and at dusk, and they knew the rhythm of their world. It was a life full of richness and beauty. For centuries, women lived lives much like these. Their stories have been written by men. Historians have emphasized the restrictions placed on them, their lack of rights, their subordinate status, their limited opportunities, their silenced voices. Yet their stories were not just stories of oppression. They were also stories of resistance, of quiet rebellion, of acts of defiance, of finding joy in the everyday, of building community, of nurturing life, of enduring hardship, of creating beauty, and of hope. They are stories of endurance, of survival, and of the quiet strength of ordinary women living extraordinary lives. Thank you for watching this episode. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to help us reach more people with these kinds of stories, please make sure you hit subscribe and share this with your friends. In the heart of medieval Europe, amidst cobbled streets and timbered houses, resided a secret order of healers known as the Grey Sisters. Cloistered within ancient walls, these women dedicated their lives to the pursuit of medicine, studying ancient texts, and tending to the sick. Yet their knowledge, though born of dedication and study, was often viewed with suspicion, their methods questioned, their cures attributed to sorcery. Amidst these doubts and fears, one Grey Sister, Hildegard von Bingen, emerged as a beacon of learning, renowned as a writer, philosopher, and above all, a healer. Hildegard's name echoed through the cloisters, drawing seekers of health and wisdom to her door. It is in this setting that our story begins, where the line between healing and witchcraft is as thin as the smoke rising from an apothecarious cauldron. Now, imagine standing in the shadow of the massive Cologne Cathedral, the air thick with the scent of incense and old stone. Inside, the cathedral is a labyrinth of shadows and soaring arches, the dim oil lamp lighting flickering on the worn stone floors. In a secluded alcove, tucked away from the grandeur of the nave, lies a small room.
Ow.
Here, amidst the musty scent of old books, sits a woman. This is Hildegard, a Benedictine abbess and visionary, and she is poring over a manuscript. her brow furrowed in concentration. Her fingers traced the faded ink, her eyes searching each word. Round her are shelves laden with books, some bound in leather, others in simple wooden covers. These are not just any books. They hold the accumulated knowledge of a lifetime filled with Hildegard's writings, her diagrams, and her observations on the natural world. Hildegard was a woman of many talents and pursuits, but today, our focus is on her work as a healer. She was a medical writer, and her work stands out like a lone star in the dark expanse of medieval medicine. You see, during this period, medical practice was often intertwined with superstition and religious beliefs. Treatments ranged from the use of herbal remedies to more, shall we say, extreme methods, such as the application of leeches or the wearing of amulets against evil spirits. With such practices commonplace, Hildegard's approach, rooted in observation and reason, was a beacon of clarity. Her keen eye for detail, coupled with her extensive knowledge of medicinal plants, allowed her to make accurate diagnoses and suggest effective treatments. Today, her meticulous record-keeping and scientific method seem almost familiar, but they were revolutionary for her time. Let's delve deeper into the contents of these manuscripts, for they hold more than just words. Let's open up one of these volumes, the pages crackling with age. Within its yellowed margins are sketches of plants, their leaves and blossoms meticulously drawn. Each illustration is not merely a picture, but a lesson, a guide to the healing properties of each herb. Turn the page and discover a diagram of the human body, the organs and humors carefully labeled. This anatomical chart, while not entirely accurate, shows a remarkable understanding of the human frame for its time. Hildegard was also a keen observer of the natural world. Her work includes detailed descriptions of animals, minerals, and even celestial bodies, all seen through the lens of a healer attuned to the rhythms of nature. One can almost feel her excitement as she recorded the habits of animals, their habitats, and even their supposed healing properties. Some entries are amusing, such as her description of how mice, when roasted and eaten, could cure hiccups, while others, like her discussion of the medicinal qualities of bear fat, seem more practical. Her keen observations were not limited to the natural world. She also delved into the realm of human ailments, documenting symptoms, causes, and potential treatments for a wide range of illnesses. Her descriptions of various diseases, from common ailments to more exotic afflictions, are both fascinating and informative. But what truly sets Hildegard apart is not just her vast store of knowledge, but her unique approach to healing. She believed in a holistic approach, taking into account not just the physical symptoms, but also the patient's emotional and spiritual well-being. In a time when medicine was often a one-size-fits-all endeavor, Hildegard advocated for personalized treatments, recognizing that each illness and each patient was unique. To understand her work better, let's look at one of her popular recipes, a treatment for ulcers. Grab a mortar and pestle, the tools of any alchemist or apothecary, and follow her instructions. Grind together the dried root of a specific plant, mix in the ash of another, and finally add a touch of wine. Stir this concoction until it forms a paste, and then apply it to the affected area. Hildegard's recipes like this one were not mere lists of ingredients. They were the result of years of observation, testing, and refinement. Each ingredient had a specific purpose, carefully chosen to address the various aspects of the ulcer. Her detailed instructions ensured that the treatment was not only effective, but also safe. And if you'd like to step further into her world, close your eyes and imagine inhaling the scent of lavender and rosemary. For us is a garden filled with herbs, each carefully planted and tended by Hildegard's order. Lavender for relaxation, rosemary for clarity, and many more whose uses Hildegard painstakingly recorded. Such gardens were not just sources of medicine, but oases of tranquility in a world often dominated by illness and pain. Now, take a moment to observe the bees buzzing from flower to flower. They are not just pollinators, they are vital to Hildegard's work. See, many of her treatments relied on the honey produced by these very bees. Honey, with its natural antibacterial properties, was an important ingredient in her healing repertoire. Observing the bees, gathering their precious honey, and understanding its medicinal value were all part of Hildegard's connection to the natural world. The world of medieval medicine, however, was not always accepting of those who dared to question traditional practices. And Hildegard, with her radical ideas and unconventional methods, often faced skepticism and opposition. Imagine the whispers echoing through the cloisters, the murmurs of doubt as Hildegard presented her theories and treatments to her peers. The world of medieval medicine was deeply entrenched in tradition, making it challenging for someone like Hildegard to gain acceptance for her new ideas. Her tireless work and dedication to healing, however, eventually won over many skeptics, establishing her legacy as a pioneer in her field. As we bring our journey through Hildegard's world to a close, consider the impact of her work. Her detailed observations, her innovative treatments, and her holistic approach laid the groundwork for future developments in medicine. While some of her theories might seem outlandish today, the spirit of inquiry and the dedication to healing that they represent remain timeless. If these stories have sparked your curiosity and love for medieval life, then we have a special invitation for you. Click the link below to explore the world of medieval life up close and personal. Thank you for joining us on this adventure through time. Until next time, stay curious, stay questioning, and never stop exploring. Hello and welcome back to the series on women in the Middle Ages. Before we begin, I want to thank our sponsor, Masterworks. Now, when we think of famous medieval women, images come to mind. Eleanor of Aquitaine, Henry VIII's wives, Mary, Queen of Scots. But what were the lives of these women really like? How did they spend their days? What did they eat? What kinds of things did they own? And most importantly, how do we find out about their lives? That's what we'll explore today. If you stick around to the end, I'll tell you how you can win an inscribed copy of my novel, The Winter King, set in the court of King Arthur. First, let me introduce myself. I'm a historian and the author of several historical novels. As a specialist in medieval history, I've written about everything from alchemy to the royal pig assassination attempt of 1400. So if you enjoy this video, remember to check out my channel. You can also find me on social media. All right, let's get started. Medieval women's history is a rich, varied landscape. And yet scholars agree that the lives of elite women were especially interesting. And that's because unlike peasants or village women, noble ladies and queens left behind records of their daily lives. We know what they ate, what they owned, and even what they thought because they wrote about it. The writings of Christine de Peasant, a 14th century French woman, show us how a female courtier saw the world. In her book, The Book of the City of Ladies, she described the ideal medieval lady who combined piety, perfection, and political savvy. Other writers created portraits of real women who, despite their exalted status, had very human problems. Queen Isabella of France worried about her weight, famously complaining, "Oh God, help me to grow thinner." Her sister, Countess Matilda of Holland, penned a letter begging a friend to send her fashionable clothing so she could keep up with the latest styles. And Isabella, Duchess of Bavaria, confessed in a letter how difficult it was to live up to her late mother's reputation for goodness. Not surprisingly, medieval women also wrote about what they owned, like Isabella of France's inventory after her death. The list included over 38,000 items. I know that sounds excessive, but much of it was for her household, including food, furniture, tapestries, and even livestock. Her clothing alone took up 12 pages. She owned over 2,700 items of clothing and undergarments, plus furs, jewels, and accessories. Now, of course, not all women had such lavish inventories. Queens and heiresses had the greatest wealth, followed by married noblewomen, then widows, and finally, single women. But no matter a woman's status, she would have had some similar items. Depending on her rank, she might have had a single bed or a four-poster bed, single mantle or a full set of stone hearth and overmantel. And no matter her status, she likely owned a spindle and distaff, needle and thread, a comb and tweezers. Besides the items they owned, medieval women's art also reveals a lot about their lives. Sculptures of the Virgin Mary offer us an idealized view of feminine beauty. Portraits of powerful women like Isabella of France show us the fashions of the day, the latest styles in clothing and hair. And other artwork depicts women at leisure, hunting, playing musical instruments, or enjoying the company of friends. Altogether, these sources reveal a world of sumptuous clothing, great wealth, and endless activity. But why do these records matter? Why should we care about a queen's wardrobe or a noblewoman's jewelry? Because these items are more than just pretty baubles or symbols of high status. They're keys to understanding women's lives. When we learn what women owned, we discover what they valued, what they needed, and how they saw themselves. We also learn how these objects functioned in society, not just as signs of wealth, but as tools, toys, and tokens of affection. Sometimes these objects tell us about women's relationships, like the fact that noble women frequently gave jewelry to servants. Did this mean the women didn't think highly of their servants? Not necessarily. It may have been a way of creating a bond between them. By giving jewelry to a servant, a noble woman made that person more visible. After all, good clothes and fine adornments were one of the ways medieval women showed they mattered. By outfitting someone else with these things, they elevated that person, making them look important too. Also, let's not forget that many medieval women were incredibly wealthy in their own right. Heiresses were often very rich, and when they married, they brought great wealth to their new families. Through studying what they owned, we learn about how marriage worked, how family money moved, and how much women's contributions mattered economically. All of these revelations come from looking at something as seemingly simple as a ring or necklace. Medieval women left behind other types of records as well, like legal documents, wills, and property records. These sources aren't as glamorous as inventories or artworks, but they're crucial to understanding women's lives. Wills tell us about family relationships, land inheritance, and personal values. Property records show us what women owned, how they earned money, and how they participated in the economy. Legal documents reveal how women's rights varied across Europe, and how they used the law to their advantage. Most importantly, these documents break the stereotype that medieval women were completely powerless. Sure, they couldn't vote or hold certain jobs, but they could own property, sue for divorce, and even press charges against their husbands. Of course, there were limits. Women could only own property if they were unmarried or if they were widows, and they still faced plenty of restrictions. But these documents prove that medieval women weren't as passive as they're sometimes portrayed. They owned businesses, farms, and even vineyards. They managed estates, hired servants, and even went to court. In short, they were active participants in medieval society, not just passive victims of circumstance. In the end, learning about medieval women's material culture is essential to understanding their lives. It allows us to explore how women lived, what they valued, and how they used material objects to shape their world. And the best part is that there's something for everyone. Whether you're interested in fashion, finance, family, or faith, there's a medieval woman out there whose story will inspire you. Thank you so much for watching. And to celebrate the launch of my latest book, The Winter King, the first 50 people to visit Masterworks, the Untarking will receive an inscribed copy of the book. It's free to sign up. So go to Masterworks, Untarking, to claim your spot. Masterworks is redefining the art market and democratizing access to contemporary art. Instead of the traditional model where only the wealthy can afford to invest in art, Masterworks buys high-end art and allows everyday investors like you to own a slice of the investment. Their service is completely free for members. There are no commissions or hidden fees and no need to hang the artwork in your home. Masterworks handles authentication, valuation, display and sale of the artwork and sends you the proceeds from any appreciation. It's an easy way to diversify your portfolio and potentially earn passive income. And as a bonus, as a subscriber of this channel, you'll get priority access and skip the waitlist. Visit Masterworks.io to Winter King or click the link below to claim your free book. I love Masterworks because they're making art collecting accessible for everyone, and as an independent creator, I value their support. And now, before you go, here's a sneak peek at next week's topic. What's one thing you'd like to know about medieval women? Please share your ideas in the comments section below. I will pick my favorite response and research it for our next episode. Thanks for joining me today. Remember to subscribe so you never miss an episode, and catch you next time. Welcome back to Life Noggin. Today we're going to wrap up our two-part series on the life of medieval women, so let's get ready to travel back in time. In part 1 of this series, we left behind the simple cottages, the rough bread, and the bundles of herbs, fresh and dried, carefully hung beside the hearth, and stepped into a very different space. Imagine yourself entering a great hall within a medieval castle. The air is cool, scented faintly of beeswax candles and rushes strewn across the stone floor. High above, banners in rich colors hang from wooden beams. At long tables, nobles sit in finely woven garments, velvets dyed deep crimson, silks shimmering in the flicker of torchlight. The contrast with the life of the peasant woman could not be sharper. Here, women also bore heavy responsibilities, though of a different kind. A noblewoman's life was defined not by endless toil in the fields, but by lineage, marriage, and the careful management of estates. Her days were filled with duties less physical, but no less demanding. Consider a queen, married often in her teens, her union arranged not for love, but for alliance. She is both wife and symbol, her body carrying the expectation of heirs who will secure dynasties. Her role is political, woven into treaties and alliances that stretch across kingdoms. A single child may decide the fate of nations. And yet, beyond this immense responsibility, there were daily rituals of refinement. Imagine a morning within her chambers. Servants braiding her hair with ribbons of gold, fastening jeweled girdles at her waist, smoothing the folds of gowns embroidered with threads of silver. Meals are brought to her on polished platters, roasted meats, spiced wine, delicate pastries filled with almonds and honey. She eats not from necessity, but as part of ceremony, surrounded by attendants. Courtly life was a performance, governed by etiquette. Every gesture, every word, carried weight. A misplaced glance, an ungracious refusal, could be remembered for years. For noble women, power was rarely direct. It was influence, persuasion, the subtle shaping of conversation and reputation. Festivals and ceremonies offered moments of brightness. Imagine grand tournaments, with knights in gleaming armor tilting at one another, while noble women watched from pavilions draped in cloths gold. The air thick with the sound of trumpets, the murmur of the crowd, the rhythmic pounding of hooves. Noble women bestowed favors, perhaps a ribbon tied to a knight's arm, a gesture heavy with symbolic weight. And within the halls, courtly love became its own ritual. Poetry and song celebrated the unattainable lady, elevating her as muse and inspiration. Troubadours strummed lutes, weaving verses of devotion, while noble women listened with composed smiles, aware that such performances were as much about politics as romance. Yet life at court was not only silk and song. Beneath the glittering surface lay pressures and perils. Rivalries among noble families could be fierce, and a misplaced alliance could lead to exile, imprisonment, or worse. Queens who failed to produce heirs could be set aside, their lives shifting from power to isolation. Still, noble women also wielded authority. In their husband's absence, they managed estates, overseeing harvests, judging disputes, directing servants. Some even commanded castles under siege, their leadership decisive in times of crisis. Picture Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most famous queens of the Middle Ages. She accompanied her husband on crusade, ruled vast lands in her own right, and lived to shape the fates of kings. Her story reminds us that noble women, while bound by expectations, could still carve remarkable paths of influence. And yet, even for the most powerful, daily rhythms continued. Embroidery circles, where women stitched tapestries while exchanging quiet words. Chapel services, their chants echoing softly through stone halls. The endless rituals of courtesy, kneeling, rising, speaking with deference. Contrast this world with that of the peasant woman. One rose at dawn to fetch water from the well, her hands roughened by work. The other rose to the sound of attendance, her hands smoothed with scented oils. Yet both bore burdens shaped by gender, whether the unyielding struggle of survival or the heavy expectations of lineage and politics. As you imagine the courtly world, the flicker of candlelight on gilded walls, the soft sweep of silken gowns, the sound of harp strings vibrating in the hall, notice how it too had its rhythm. A rhythm not of toil in the fields, but of ceremony and duty, performance and restraint. But what did women have in common? What would their lives have been like if they had crossed paths, the peasant woman and the noble? To answer, let's imagine a village fair. It's a scene of energy and noise, of bartering, jesting, and bartered animals. Merchants from distant towns offer wares not seen every day. The peasant woman pushes through the throng, seeking supplies for her household. Cloth for a new tunic, yarn, dyed a brilliant blue, a loaf of gingerbread for her children. Perhaps she lingers over a peddler's wares, bright ribbons, combs with bone-carved handles. Suddenly a fanfare rings out, announcing the arrival of nobility, perhaps the queen herself. A hush falls over the crowd. The peasant woman instinctively drops to her knees, her head bowed low. As the queen passes, her train rustling like autumn leaves, the peasant woman dares a glance. She sees not just finery, but weariness in the queen's eyes, a longing for something more than ceremony. Their gazes meet for a fleeting moment, a silent acknowledgement of shared humanity. Then the peasant woman drops her eyes, returning to the fray, each woman carrying the weight of her station, yet each also bearing the quiet strength born of living fully in the rhythms of her time. As we bring our journey to a close, consider the tapestry we've woven together, thread by thread, story by story. We've explored the life of medieval women through the prism of their daily routines, their tasks, and the spaces they inhabited. We started in the humble cottages where peasant women rose before sunrise, where their days were a cycle of domestic duties and farm work. Then we stepped into the hallowed halls of nobility, where noble women navigated the intricate dance of courtly life. We saw how both lived and moved in distinct rhythms, each dictated by the demands of their station. But amidst these differences, we found common threads. Each woman, whether noble or peasant, was a daughter, sister, wife, mother. The roles came with unique challenges and rewards, shaping their experiences in profound ways. And while their duties differed, so too did their sources of strength. The peasant woman drew resilience from the tight-knit community, from shared struggles and the solace of faith. The noble woman found support in the rituals of her court, in the subtle strategies of power, and the deep-rooted traditions that sustained her. As we reflect on their lives, let us celebrate their quiet strength. Let us recognize the tapestry they wove, not just of hardship or privilege, but of resilience, adaptation, and quiet triumphs. These women, though separated by social standing, were united by the universal truths of human experience, reminding us that despite the passage of time, the essence of what it means to be a woman remains timeless. So what do you think? What surprised you about life as a woman in the Middle Ages? What would you have found most challenging? Share your thoughts below. And if you want to learn more about life in medieval times, check out our series, Life in Medieval Times. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to keep on thinking. Well, hello again. Welcome back to the series. I hope you've enjoyed getting to know some of the women of the Middle Ages, and thank you so much for joining me on this journey. For the past few weeks, we've stepped back in time and explored the lives of 3 remarkable women from the medieval era. Each episode has been like a portal to another world, revealing the unique experiences of a peasant woman, Joan of Arc, and a queen consort. Through their stories, we've seen how the medieval world was shaped by the roles women played, the challenges they faced, and the contributions they made, even when those contributions were often overlooked or undervalued. Now, as we draw our journey to a close, I want to take a moment to look back on the path we've traveled, and to consider the wider picture of women's lives in the Middle Ages. If you haven't yet had a chance to meet these remarkable women, then don't worry. They're waiting for us just beyond the cobblestone streets and castle walls. Our first stop was the humble cottage of a peasant woman. Here we woke with the sun, sharing in the daily routine of a life closely tied to the rhythms of the land. We felt the toil and sweat as we toiled in the fields, and we understood the quiet dignity of a life dedicated to family and community. We saw the burden of endless domestic tasks, the anxiety of financial uncertainty, and the deep satisfaction that came from the simple pleasures of a shared meal and a hard day's work. But our journey didn't end there. For though the peasant woman's life was rooted in the everyday, she too was touched by the extraordinary events that shaped the times. When her son joined the crusade, she became a part of a larger story, a story of faith, of conflict, and of hope. She sent him off with prayers and provisions, her love woven into every stitch of his surcoat, every crust of bread. And when he returned, bearing tales of distant lands and battles fought, she listened with a mix of pride and worry, her world momentarily expanded by his stories. Her son, like many others, was swept up in the fervor of the Crusades, driven by a desire for adventure, religious devotion, or perhaps a yearning for something more. He marched alongside fellow young men from the village, united in their cause and bound by a shared sense of purpose. Together, they formed a community of believers, their bonds forged in the fires of faith and tested in the crucible of battle. But while they fought for God and glory, the peasant woman prayed for his safe return, her faith anchored in the hope of seeing him whole and unharmed once more. The Crusades, with their promises of salvation and conquest, might have seemed a world away from the quiet cottage, yet they were inextricably linked. The medieval world was not merely a tapestry of grand events and sweeping histories. It was also composed of the threads of everyday life, of hopes and dreams, fears and uncertainties. Joys and sorrows, all experienced by ordinary people like the peasant woman. From the fields and farmlands, we turned our steps toward a different kind of terrain, the battlefields of France, where the legendary Joan of Arc emerged. We witnessed firsthand the horrors of war, the clash of steel on steel, the agony of wounds both physical and emotional, and the constant threat of death. Yet amidst the chaos, we saw Joan's unwavering spirit. We watched her rise from a childhood marked by hardship and societal constraints to become a beacon of hope for a nation. We marveled at her courage, her determination to fulfill what she believed to be her divine mission, and her ability to rally others to her cause. Joan's journey was one of defying expectations. In a world where societal norms dictated a narrow path for women, she blazed a trail of her own. Her story was a testament to the strength and resilience of the human spirit, as well as the power of belief and conviction. But it was also a reminder of the price of courage. For Joan's path was not without its obstacles. She faced skepticism, opposition, and ultimately, persecution. Her story serves as a stark reminder of the cost of challenging the status quo and the persecution of those who dare to break free from societal constraints. In the hushed chambers of the healer's cottage, we found solace in knowledge. Here, amidst the scent of herbs and the murmur of healing incantations, we learned about the intricate balance between the natural and the supernatural, the practical and the mystical. The healer was not just a provider of remedies. She was a keeper of ancient wisdom, a guide in a world where the boundaries between illness and witchcraft, between medicine and magic, were often blurred. We watched as she mixed potions and concocted remedies, drawing on her deep understanding of plants and their properties. We sat with patients, sharing in their pain and their hope for recovery, and we grappled with the ethical dilemmas she faced, the fine line she had to walk to avoid being branded a heretic or a fraud. The healer's life was one of quiet dedication, of serving her community in the face of limited resources and societal prejudice. She navigated a world where her knowledge was both revered and feared, where the very tools of her trade could be twisted into accusations of sorcery. Yet she persisted, driven by her commitment to alleviate suffering and heal the sick. Her story highlights the crucial role women played in preserving traditional knowledge and practices, often in the absence of formal training or recognition. Finally, we stepped into the world of luxury and intrigue, the grand halls of queens and consorts. Here, amidst the opulence and pageantry, we encountered powerful women who wielded influence, brokered alliances, and shaped the course of kingdoms. We observed the rituals of courtly life, the elaborate ceremonies, the intricate web of social customs, and the constant need to navigate a world of etiquette and decorum. The queen consort, the king's wife, occupied a position of immense privilege and responsibility. Her status elevated her above the common folk, granting her access to power and influence that most women could only dream of. Yet this elevated status came with its own set of challenges and restrictions. She was not merely a member of the royal family, she was an emblem of the kingdom, a living representation of her husband's power and lineage. As such, her every move was scrutinized. Her bearing, her choices, and even her emotions were subject to public scrutiny and held up to the magnifying glass of courtly gossip. These four women, each inhabiting a different facet of medieval society, offer us a glimpse into the rich tapestry of women's lives during this era. Their stories intersect and diverge, mirroring the complexities of a world often dominated by men, but enriched by the contributions of women, whether as laborers, warriors, healers, or queens. Through their eyes, we've seen that medieval women's lives were not a monolith. They were a mosaic of experiences shaped by their social class, personal choices, and historical circumstances. As our journey together comes to an end, I invite you to carry these stories with you. Let them serve as reminders of the strength, resilience, and agency of women throughout history. As we continue to explore history, let us remember that every era is built upon the lives and contributions of ordinary and extraordinary people. And among them, the women of the Middle Ages stand out as beacons of courage, resourcefulness, and an unyielding spirit. So thank you for joining me on this journey through time. And thank you for coming into my life and becoming part of my story. I hope I've brought you as much joy as I've found in bringing you these tales. Just as the medieval world was shaped by the lives of countless individuals, my own path has been influenced by all of you who watch, comment, and engage with my work. Your support means everything to me. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And if you'd like to continue exploring history with me, don't forget to subscribe for new releases every week. I can't wait to see you again next time, ready for a new adventure. Until then, stay curious, keep asking questions, and remember, the past is never truly past. It's a living, breathing part of our world today. Thank you again. Take care and goodbye for now.